Court is now in session.
All rise. This is Order in the Court, an inside look into college basketball on the West Coast with veteran announcer Ted Robinson and the Pac-12's all-time leading scorer, Don McLean. So please be seated. Order in the Court. Here now are Ted and Don.
Welcome, everybody, to Order in the Court this week. Yeah, I know I like to be outside. We're having an atmospheric river in the Bay Area this week, so it's a little bundled up, but a pause in the rain for right now. So able to connect with Don.
Which is coming down here tonight, Ted, by the way.
Oh, is
atmospheric river, yeah. We'll be seeing that stuff tonight.
Well, good. And the good news, as I saw over the weekend, anybody that watched the Grammys saw the incredible devotion and the fact that the fires are 100% contained now.
Yeah.
So thanks to that. Okay, a little bit of a light week for our schools, our two Pac-12 schools. Oregon State had the game last Tuesday night. They got pounded by Gonzaga. Payback game for what happened in Corvallis.
Kind of saw that coming, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then the Beavs had the weekend off. For the Cougs, unfortunately, continuing a bad trend. They just had a totally lost weekend, losing on the road both at Pacific for the second time and then at San Francisco. Don, I'm going to ask you this question. Washington State, and we touched on some of the stuff last week, and you made a great point. Look, people at the beginning of the year didn't know, in the West Coast Conference, didn't know the Eastern Washington players. Now they've seen them. Yeah. They have an idea about how they play offense. And we mentioned last week the Cougs would not be considered the strongest defensive team, but my goodness, the turnover thing is Saturday night at San Francisco. Washington State had 15 turnovers in the first half. Impossible to win now.
What the expectations were from the start of the year, I think they exceeded those expectations for a long time. But I think you're right. I think the scouting report, the longer the season goes along, the more other teams figure you out, and that's across the board. That's not just a Washington State thing. That's for everyone. But I think the injuries have really caught up to them. And you know, when you do get scouted more, and when there is more game planning, the more players you have, rotation players, the better. And guys that you were counting on. And so I think as well as David Riley has done in his first year, and I think he has, and I think he's established how they're going to play and how they're going to do things, I just think when you have players that are in roles that you weren't expecting to be in those roles with all these injuries, eventually it catches up to you, and it feels like it's catching up to them.
Yeah, and they did get Isaiah Watts back last weekend, so that's positive for them.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully helps. He'll be the only one of the key players that's really returning. But let me ask you, Don, from your days playing, is there something, because every coach in the history of basketball has preached don't turn the ball over. We're just around Mick Cronin, who made it, basically on his tablet, that's commandments 1 through 10 are don't turn the ball over.
Yes.
Okay, what do you do as a player, as you were, or a coach, to address a team like the Cougars that are just having huge turnover problems?
Well, I mean, is it too late in the season to go back to fundamental stuff? Like, do we the next practice, do we work on our jump stopping and getting to 2 feet, and then work on our passing and making sure that we're accurate with passes? Or is it more of a game plan thing? Are people picking us up full? Are they pressuring us? Are they double teaming us? Are they attacking our ball handlers? And if it is more of a press thing and it's more of a, teams attacking you, and just being more poised. But again, that goes back to what we were just talking about, guys being in elevated roles that probably weren't expected to be in those roles, and, getting better in those situations.
Yeah. And the fascinating part to me, watching some of their Saturday night game at San Francisco, was, they had all these turnover problems, and they did clean it up in the second half. The Cougars did. Unfortunately, the game was kind of out of reach by then. But their point guard, Nate Calmese, 0 turnovers. So often you say, okay, it's a point guard. It starts with the point guard. In this case, Calmese did not turn the ball over.
Yeah, but he didn't score either, Ted. I think he had 2 points. Right. So I think they kept the ball out of his hands. That's what it sounds like to me, or looking at the box score. And so he didn't have a lot of opportunities to score or make plays for others. But, it's interesting. I was talking about this in my game on Sunday in Eugene about finishing games. A lot of coaches talk about starting games. We need to get off to a fast start. Well, if you turn it over that many times, you're probably not going to have an opportunity to finish games. But to me, when talking about turnovers, it's really live ball turnovers. you can turn it over. If it's a dead ball, like if you travel or if it's an offensive foul, the game stops. You can reset your defense. When you really get into trouble, especially on the road, is when you're giving up live ball turnovers. The other team's going the other way, most likely with numbers, and that's how games get away from you on the road. And it sounds like that's what happened to Washington State against San Francisco.
Yeah, and that's why that points off turnovers number can be incredibly important, because it speaks to what you're talking about. All right, this week the Beavers and the Cougars are going to play. It's the only time they play head-to-head. They're going to play in Corvallis. Give me from what you've seen of the two teams, Don, how do you see their head-to-head match?
I really like Oregon State and how they're playing this year. You and I have talked, for weeks now about DeMarco Minor and his leadership. And so I think based on where Washington State is trending with the injuries, with teams having all this game plan for them, I think Oregon State, is still playing, and still playing at a high level. I threw that Gonzaga game out the window. You knew that was coming because Oregon State had already beat them. But does it affect them? And I think what's interesting, which we didn't used to see in the old Pac-12, is you play a game on a Tuesday, then you don't play a game till the next Thursday.
Right.
That's a long break. So that can either help you or it can hurt you. I have a feeling it's going to help Oregon State to get back to some of their basic stuff and working on things that they need to work on. But I expect Oregon State, based on what's happening with both teams, to take care of business in that one.
Hey, Don, it seems interesting from what I can gather watching, again, the teams, because we mentioned Oregon State doesn't really have a big inside player. Parsofala is a good down-low player, but he's about 6'8". The Cougars kind of flip their offense. Their bigs come out and shoot the ball. So they don't play that low post. It's not going to stress the Beavers' defense, I guess is where I'm going.
No, and I think, Fala, even though he's not real big, he's effective down there because he's so big. Yeah. And so Wayne does try and get it down there to him and try and have balance offensively inside and out. But you wonder, will Fala play a lot if he's got to play defensively out on the perimeter and contest those Washington State players shooting threes? So that part will be interesting to see how Wayne adjusts to that.
Yeah, that is a good call. All right, so Oregon State is still playing for the hopes of being in the bubble, and this is going to be a mini soapbox for me because I have no idea how the heck they figured this net again, and that's partly on me because I haven't done the deep dive to parse out all the specifics. But as we're talking right now, Don, Oregon State is 62 in the net. Santa Clara in the conference right one spot ahead at 61. Oregon State, though, has 2 games left with St. Mary's. They're done with Gonzaga, but they have 2 games left with St. Mary's. Those are quad one. Those are the quality wins, so to speak. So it's still a chance for the Beavs if they can grab at least one of those to elevate their position.
Yeah, but I just don't think, and I hate to be Mr. Negative, but I've always called them like I see them, Ted. You know that. Even if they won both those games, does their net get up high enough to be considered an at-large bid? I don't know about that. But the thing, and I said this last week, that's important is I think they need to position themselves in the WCC tournament. Can they get up to 1 or 2 and get the double bye? Probably not likely, but let's shoot for that 3 or 4 and at least get a bye. So now get the auto bid if we win the WCC tournament. And look, Oregon State is capable of winning that WCC tournament. I know St. Mary's is rolling and they haven't lost, but anything can happen in the postseason in that tournament situation. And so if I'm Oregon State, yes, we want to win every game. Maybe it puts us in the conversation for the at-large, but more importantly, I'm looking at seeding for them in the WCC tournament.
And I think it's a great point because now, especially in Corvallis, they're starting to talk more about this because, again, the West Coast Conference tournament hasn't been on the front burner for people in Corvallis or Pullman, fans of the Pac-10 or 12. But it heavily weighs the regular season. Unlike any other conference tournament, it gives the regular season serious weight to the point that the first or second seeds, I think it's 15 straight years or 16 straight years, something like that either the 1 or 2 seed has won the postseason tournament. And that highlights your importance, at least for the Beavers. See if you can get into at least the top 4.
Yeah, 1 or 2, you only have to win 2 games.
Right.
You're automatically in the semifinals. So, yeah, and I don't know. Obviously, St. Mary's has got to be one of those first 2 seeds. And
yes,
I don't know if Oregon State can climb all the way up. And that's why I say, Shoot for the 3 or 4 seed. Now you got to win 3 games, but that's doable for this Oregon State team.
Yeah. All right. Do you understand the net? Have you figured out how they devise this?
I understand in broad strokes. I haven't gone through and really tried to understand all the metrics that go into it. The one thing that I haven't liked with the net is that they say that blowout wins don't matter. Okay, there's no metric in the net that rewards blowout wins. All your individual metrics, shooting percentages, rebound, all the stuff that goes into that is elevated because you blew somebody out. So in reality, blowouts do help you. And I don't know how many teams we've seen. Like, for instance, I'm doing a lot of Big Ten now. Maryland blew everybody out in the non-con. They're middle of the pack in the Big Ten, but their net's in the 20s because they blew everyone out in the non-conference at home. And so, and I've talked to coaches about this and how do we schedule now? Because we can just play a bunch of nobodies at home, win by 40 every game, and we go into conference play with our net in the top 20 probably. But are you ready for your conference play? And how does it play out once you get into the regular season of the conference and what that does to your team? Or do you play a tougher schedule, understand what the net's doing, and everybody uses that? But there shouldn't be multiple ways to get a higher net. It should be just across the board. This is the net. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of ways to go about scheduling.
And I'm laughing, Don, because at the end of the football season we just finished, there was conversation that because the football method, and it's still the football playoff is still an invitational. 5 teams now automatically get in, but the other 7 are invited. Mm-hmm. So it's subjective. It's human beings doing it subjectively. And people say, gosh, there should be an equivalent to the net in basketball for the football selection process. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, help me with this. St. Mary's right now has 3 games clear on Gonzaga and everybody else in the West Coast Conference. St. Mary's is 3-1 in the quad 1, the most quality wins. Gonzaga is 2-6 in quad 1 games. Gonzaga's 9 spots ahead of St. Mary's in the net. And St. Mary's beat them head to head the one time they played so far. That's the stuff that forces people like me. My brain blows up. I don't understand how they come up with that.
It's because of the non-con and who you played in the non-con. And Gonzaga had one of the toughest non-conference schedules in the country. And they won a lot of those games. And so their net, and that was to what I just said, their net was so elevated before WCC play even started that's why you see that St. Mary's is undefeated, 3 games ahead of them. But because they didn't play the schedule Gonzaga played in the non-con, that's why you're seeing those teams where their nets are at right now.
But at some point, shouldn't you have to win? I mean, like I said, Gonzaga's 2-6 in quad 1. So at some point you should have to win some of those.
But again, that's blowouts matter too. And so there's a lot of metrics inside of that net ranking. And I just don't have the time or the patience to go through it all. But and the other thing too is, Ted, that doesn't get talked about enough is your net's affected by who you've beaten or lost to and what they do. And so it's so complicated, but that's what they use. So that's what we got to go with.
So, and this relates to the future Pac-12 conference. Gonzaga is the number 1 West Coast Conference team in the net, even though they're not in first place in the conference. The number 1 team in the Mountain West Conference in the net is Utah State, even though New Mexico beat them the other night in Logan at Utah State's home court. So New Mexico actually leads the conference, but Utah State has the number 1 net rank. And there are 4 schools right now in the future Pac-12 that are in the top 50 with Gonzaga, Utah State, San Diego State, and Boise State. And I look at that again, I say that highlights what we've thought, that the next iteration of this conference shapes up to be a really good basketball league.
Yeah, and that's what everyone says, Ted. Whenever I have this conversation about the Pac-12 coming back together in a couple of years, everyone, coaches, people, fans, whoever, it's going to be a really good basketball conference. It really is. I don't expect there to be much turnover in coaching. What would change? If anything, the teams that are good now, Utah State, San Diego State, Gonzaga, Boise State, they're going to be even better by a bigger conference in the Pac-12. And so if you're a Pac-12 fan and realize that things change and that conference realignment is here and it's here to stay, get on board for the Pac-12 in a year and a half, because it is going to be a very, very good basketball conference.
Now we're going to bring back something. Don, in our past years of the Pac-12 conference, Don did a wonderful basketball podcast with Mike Yam every week. And we had Don McLean's story time, and stories which are an essential part of a life in baseball. We don't hear enough of basketball stories. So, Don, that's the value you bring.
Well,
take it away.
Yeah, and I knew that we were going to do it this week, and I tried to think of something. I talked to Adam Gordon, our producer, and wanted to do something, hopefully Oregon State, Washington State related, and I think I can do that for this week for sure. One of the greatest player in Oregon State history is Gary Payton, and he was National Player of the Year. Unbelievable player, unbelievable defender, and obviously. And this came up last week up near you, Ted. He was at a Warriors game, so it came up about how he and Kevin Durant went back and forth. And so the story is, and I went back and looked, and it was actually fun today. I went back and looked at all the box scores from my freshman year at UCLA. They had them all in archived and a thing. It was fun to do that. But I wanted to make sure at my age, Ted, I hadn't forgotten anything or something wasn't right or it was flip-flopped or something. So I found the box score from that game. And it was the first time we played Oregon State was at Oregon State. And we were about 10 or 11 games in UCLA, and I was already off to a really good start. I think I was averaging like 18 or 19 a game. And so we get to Oregon State for the first time, and Gary Payton makes it a priority to challenge me. Like, okay, let's see what this freshman's got. And oh, by the way, I shot 82. I went back to look at this too. I shot 82% at the foul line my freshman year, which is skewed by what I'm going to tell you here in a second. But I was a very good free throw shooter. Part of the reason why I scored so many points. And Gary Payton stands right next to me. Whether or not he should be standing next to me, he's standing next to me and starts up in my ear. You're not this, you're not that, you're not going to do this, you're not doing that. And I I'd been doing that. I played basketball, but not to this level. I mean, it was every time down the court. So I had a pretty good game. I had 25 in the game, which I didn't remember. But as an 82% free throw shooter, Ted, 92% my senior year at the free throw line, Gary Payton, and I can blame this solely on him, and he can take credit for it, in that game, 7 for 14 from the free throw line. 7 for 14 from the free throw line. Never had to be the only game you were. Yeah. Never had I had a free throw shooting game like that. And it wasn't about really what he said. What he does is it's so intense and so much that you lose track of your concentration and what you're trying to do. Like you start thinking about other things and you're thinking about what he's saying, and what he's saying doesn't bother you, but it just gets you out of your head and your concentration. And so 7 for 14 at the free throw line never happened again in the next 4 years of my career at UCLA.
That is I've never heard you say that. That's a great story. And it legitimizes the stat that I've always wondered about, which teams put on their sheet: free throw defense. The glove just gave us an example of free throw defense.
Exactly. The best ever. The best I ever came across.
That's great. Well, Don, that's great. That's a wonderful way to bring back story time and to wrap up our order of the court. Have a great week. We'll see you all next week.